family has asked Glenn Ramswood to share. Glenn lives in Chicago, in the Chicago area. I'll let him tell you.
It's great to be here. My wife is Barbara Olson. She's now uses the name Ramswood after many, many years. My first recollection of Nathalie Haag was back in 1950 in a small town in southwestern Minnesota by the name of Westbrook. We had an antenna on our house and a little 8-inch screen on the television set. And across diagonally, I remember seeing a keyboard, and it would fade in and out, and there was this lady playing the piano. That was my first recollection. My aunt and uncle lived here, and they were able to go over to the studio, and I thought I had died in one day. I was probably about 10 or 11 at that point. Then in the early 60s, I came to Minneapolis, and I went to Northwestern Hospital School of Nursing and Anesthesia. And during that time, my goal was to, when I came up here, I wanted to learn to play like Nathalie Haag, and my goal was to get involved. And bless Tom Hardwick and Nathalie Haag, they got me involved, and I can remember the first time I sat at the mighty Kimball organ, and I played C with a G in the pedal, and that curtain opened, and Nathalie Haag was sitting at the pianos, and we sang My Anchor Holds. And she was the most loving person and wanted to get you involved if you wanted to. I remember the TV choir practices. I one little incident I remember on television. Tom was passing the organ to me the first time. Sister Peterson was praying, and it was that Lowry organ, and he would go clear up at the front, and I would pick up the keys, and I put my foot on that Lowry organ pedal, and it flipped very easy. And all of a sudden, it went full blast. And Nathalie Haag's eyes on the other side of the studio was enough to, I thought, boy, my ministry career here is going to be over very quickly. However, she was quick to forgive and teach. And I've used the skills from those television programs in my professional life multiple times. But the most significant thing she did for me was to give me an opportunity to copy all of her arrangements prior to my leaving for the Air Force. And through the years, I have used them. At first, I wrote them all out. When I was in Ankara, Turkey, we ministered in the chapel. The attaché at the embassy copied all of my handwritten Nathalie Haag arrangements. And then when we were back in Minneapolis, when I got out of the service, we were at Crystal Free Church, and I had a choir. And in about 75, 76, we came back to Salt Harbor for a short time, and then we went out to Crystal when we started having kids. And I wanted her to teach me Showers of Blessing. I had always loved that, and I could never figure it out. So remember the old Acrosonic piano that she would bang on? And I had a little tape recorder and taped this piano lesson. And for the last 2 years, I have been working on remembering that song that she taught me 30 years ago. And this past Sunday night, I do a hymn sing at the Arlington Heights Evangelical Free Church. And we had 900 people from 66 churches in the Chicagoland area. And I performed Showers of Blessing. And I want to give you the efforts of my work and Tom. Tom checked it over, so it's pretty correct. But Nathalie Haag is more personal than that to us. We have a Nathalie in our family that was named after her. She was born 39 years ago, and her name is Nathalie Joy Ramsborg Johnson. We have a picture of Nathalie over here when our Nathalie was visiting her at the Souls Harbor at the Pick Congress. And she now is married, has 3 kids. And we too have the only original manuscript I have is the one that Tom hand carried on the airplane for our wedding back in '68 and played My Love I Give to Thee. It was sung at our wedding by Rich Flagel. And it's been sung at both 2 of our kids' weddings. And that's the only original manuscript I have. I have everything else Nathalie wrote, but they're all copies. And I think the main thing is the scripture memory that you mentioned, that we all have to memorize. And you read, Shelley read the verse that I took for my life verse, call unto me, and I will answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things that thou knowest not. Thank you. It's great to be here and see so many friends.
Thank you, Glenn. If you had never heard one of Nathalie's specialty arrangements, she would take just common hymns like Showers of Blessing and arrange it for classical piano. Very difficult runs and all sorts of stuff. I cannot believe he wrote every note down.
Wow.
And how long did that take you to do?
I worked on it off and on for 2 years.
For 2 years. That's a
But
tremendous
he
feat.
has Sibelius, you know, it's the software. not
Yes, the
exactly
software.
by hand.
So that helps. That helps. Well, I'd just like to share a little bit with you. I'd like to give, this is really a tribute to Nathalie, but also Jack, plus some personal sharing that I would like to do myself. And I have to get the book a little closer to see my notes. I had the privilege of working with Nathalie and Jack Haag for nearly 30 years. When I was in high school, I attended a Billy Graham crusade in New York City, where we lived, or outside the city. And it was at Madison Square Garden. I went for 16 weeks. Sang in the choir every night. That sparked something in me. I saw what it meant and what could happen to reach beyond the walls of the church, to reach people with the love of Jesus. Through citywide meetings as well as radio and television and recording. And through that, God called me to that. And it was as definite a call as if I was standing behind the pulpit preaching. I moved to Minneapolis, and my brother said, "You've got to see this. There's a church that's on television." And you have to understand, that was non-existent at that time. There was no church on television anywhere. And I looked at it and I said, wow, I really like this. And, then Dick Flegel, many of you know Dick, was having a week of special meetings at his church with Mel Johnson. And he asked me to come and play the organ. One day that week he stopped at Jack and Nathalie's house out in Bloomington and to use the phone. Now that tells you how long ago that was. Can you believe that? Can you even remember those days? He told Nathalie, we're having a week of special meetings, why don't you come out and play a couple piano solos for us? Which she did, which was very unusual because she was so busy at Souls Harbor, church, and television that she rarely did that kind of thing. After playing one of them, she said, I'd like the organist to play along with me. That was me. Afterward, she talked to me, she said, you know what, we're looking for an organist right now. She said, why don't you come down and visit us at Souls Harbor? And I did, and the rest is history. I started working at Souls Harbor. Jack, Nathalie, Sonia, and Linda became my second family. Also, the people of Souls Harbor became my second family. There was such a family spirit and relationship there. And always, after every rehearsal and after every service, Nathalie would say to everyone, okay, let's go get coffee. Recognize that phrase? Well, it was more than coffee, we all ate and had the bodies to prove it. But anyway, we had a great time. There would be sometimes 5 people, 10, 20, 30, even 40 people, always fellowshipping together. To work with the Petersons and the Haags at Souls Harbor changed my life. Nathalie was unique. She had a unique personality. She was unique as a musician also. Now, there are a lot of musicians that are kind of similar, but not Nathalie. There was no one just like Nathalie. She had such a unique style. But she was open to other styles as well. In Souls Harbor Church and TV ministry, she would have everything from a country gospel song with a guitar all the way to a classical piano piece which she arranged for choir and instruments with words from the songs. I don't know anybody else who was doing that. Publishers let me back up. It was unheard of in those days. Very unusual. Maybe these days too. Two examples of those were Claire de Lune, the famous piano piece. She set that to the 23rd Psalm with voices and instruments. I have to say, to this day, that is one of the most beautiful pieces of music and arrangements that I've ever heard. Just absolutely phenomenal. Another one, if you know music, was Rondo Capriccioso by Mendelssohn. Very difficult to play, but she arranged that and did that with the choir, with words for the songs and instruments. Publishers wanted to publish her arrangements as well as songs that she wrote, and they did. They did. They sought her. Today you can buy just about any published arrangement of anything in any style, whether it be traditional, contemporary, classical, whatever. But in those days, that was almost non-existent. They were just starting to publish choir arrangements. It was called Better Choirs, if anybody remembers that. But that was so unusual to have a church that would do arrangements like that. What she did was unique, and she was widely known for it. I don't know if you realize how far that went. There were two women in the United States who were known nationally for doing this kind of thing. The first one was Audrey Meyer in California. She directed the Phil Kerr Harmony Chorus for a big, huge thing in California once a month. And she wrote a lot of songs. The second one was Nathalie Haag. And people came from all over the country to see what she was doing and how she did it. Many musicians in the Twin Cities considered her to be one of the best pianists in the Twin Cities in classical as well as Christian music. She could sight read and play some of the most difficult music there was, and people talked about it all over the place. I mean, musicians in a classical field. I heard one tell me one time, he said, I don't know of anybody in the Twin Cities that can play one particular piece of music other than Nathalie Haag. It was so difficult. Well-known, Dick Anthony, well-known Chicago musician, told musicians that he sent to sing in the Twin Cities, don't worry about it, Nathalie can read anything that I can write. And some of them were very difficult. One time, someone unrelated to the Christian ministry world asked me what I did. I told them that I worked at Souls Harbor and worked with Nathalie Haag. They said, oh, she's that famous woman. That's the kind of reputation she had. Now I'd like to just share some interesting tidbits with you that are maybe totally unrelated, just a lot of different things. She had the ability to excite people to be involved. I remember at a conference center that Rex Humbard had, people who came not even knowing each other, in a very short time after they arrived, would be gathered around Nathalie and the piano, singing together. It could be a dozen or more people. And these people, they're from different states, didn't even know each other. She just had that ability. It was amazing to see it. As I mentioned earlier, she also had tremendous creative abilities, which she put to good use in the creation of dramatic Christian stage productions. I mentioned it earlier. One of them, the Tony Fontaine story, was made by Gospel Films into a Christian movie, which led to my wife, Jan, committing her life to Christ at a church in Iowa. Someone invited her to church, and she saw the Tony Fontaine story, a movie that was made based on Nathalie's live stage production. One time the TV choir took a bus trip, as they often did, to minister at churches in the Milwaukee area. The ad in the Milwaukee paper advertised Nathalie Haag as the musical Wonder Woman. And she was. There are a lot of funny stories, and I can't take a lot of time, but I remember Linda and Sonia and I, when we would get to laughing. We'd be in a restaurant somewhere, and we'd get the giggles and get tickled about something, laughing, and the more we tried to stop, the worse it got. And Nathalie would kind of get tickled too. And Jack would be tickled at first, but then he'd say, if this keeps up, either you leave or I have to leave. And that just made us laugh all the more. There was one time I went out to play the organ, as Glenn was talking about that big old pipe organ at the Lyceum, and the choir warmed up behind the curtain, and then they would open the curtain to start the service. All of a sudden I heard shrieking and howling and laughing. I thought, well, what is going on? And I went back there. What had happened is that Nathalie was wearing a wig, and in those days it was a big deal. All the women wore wigs. It was the only thing. Well, she gave a big cutoff at the end of the choir number and accidentally knocked her wig off. And it went flying through the air. So there were a lot of funny stories. Before I ever came to Minneapolis, Nathalie played for George Wilson and Minneapolis Youth for Christ at the old Minneapolis Auditorium. One night the guest was Stuart Hamlin. He was kind of a salty guy and was quite famous at the time. Nathalie was going to play for him. He introduced the song, looked over at her, and he was ready to start, and he said, "Okay, baby, get on that horse and ride." She used to love to tell that story. As I mentioned in her bio, together with Jack's help during doing the recording, we recorded 2 albums for Word Records, one of which became the record of the month for Word Records and was recognized in several national publications. Again, with Jack's help, we had the privilege of accompanying people on over 50 record albums, some well-known, some just local. In those days, with no recorded accompaniment tracks, you can buy those now, but they were non-existent at that time. So we were called on to play for all the gospel singers that came to the Twin Cities. Here and in the Akron area, we played for such people as Pat Boone, Dale Evans, and George Beverly Shea, Billy Graham's soloist, who always called on us when he came to sing in the Twin Cities. In the beginning, the Soulsider Ministry, Reverend Peterson Sr. had a live radio broadcast on KTIS called The Man with the Message. I remember hearing about how Nathalie would go very early in the morning to catch a streetcar to go down to KTIS and do live music for the broadcast. Most people don't even know about that. In the 50s, when they first started the TV program, it was on WCCO. It was long before I was around. It was labeled the best locally produced TV program in the Twin Cities by a reviewer in the newspaper. Jack and Nathalie were 2 of the most generous people.